In the vast expanse of the universe, where stars twinkled like diamonds scattered across an endless black velvet canvas, there existed a planet unlike any other. This world, known to its inhabitants as Xylophia 7, pulsed with an otherworldly energy that manifested in shimmering auroras that danced across its skies both day and night. The planet's surface was a kaleidoscope of bioluminescent forests, crystalline mountains that sang when the wind passed through them, and oceans that glowed with colors humans couldn't even name. The inhabitants of this remarkable world were equally extraordinary. At the heart of their society stood their queen, a being whose very presence commanded both awe and reverence. She towered nearly 12 feet tall, her body covered in iridescent scales that shifted colors with her emotions. Deep purples when contemplative, fiery oranges when excited, and calming blues when at peace. Her eyes, large and multifaceted like a dragonfly's, could see in wavelengths beyond human comprehension, allowing her to perceive truths hidden from lesser beings. Unlike Earth's monarchs who ruled from gilded palaces, the alien queen resided in a living throne room grown from the planet's sentient crystal formations. These crystals responded to her thoughts, reshaping themselves into whatever form she needed. Chairs that molded perfectly to her form, walls that displayed holographic maps of the stars, or even weapons that materialized from pure energy when required. Her voice, when she chose to speak, carried a melodic resonance that could soothe raging storms or command armies with equal ease. The Queen's court consisted of advisors who looked more like graceful sea creatures than traditional alien stereotypes. Their bodies flowed and shifted, tentacles undulating with purpose as they moved about their duties. They communicated through a combination of musical notes and color changes, creating a symphony of information that filled the air with constant, beautiful complexity. Despite their advanced nature, they maintained a curious innocence about the universe beyond their world, particularly regarding the peculiar species called humans who had recently begun visiting their sector of space. These humans, with their rigid forms and limited sensory capabilities, fascinated the Queen and her people. They came in sleek metal ships that paled in comparison to the organic beauty of Xylophian technology, yet they carried within them a spark of something extraordinary. A drive to explore, to understand, and to connect that resonated deeply with the Queen's own nature. It was this shared curiosity that would soon bring human and alien face to face in a moment that would change both species forever. The encounter began on what humans would call a Tuesday morning, though time held little meaning on Xylophia 7. A small scout ship bearing the emblem of the United Earth Alliance had entered the planet's orbit, its crew unaware of the diplomatic storm they were about to trigger. Captain Marcus Hale, a seasoned officer with 20 years of space service behind him, led the team that would make first contact. His mission was straightforward: establish peaceful relations, gather scientific data, and ensure humanity's continued expansion into this region of space wouldn't disrupt local populations. What no one had anticipated was how quickly things would escalate. As the shuttle descended toward the Crystal Palace, the Queen's advisors detected something unusual: a weapon system integrated into their landing craft. To the Xylophians, who had long ago evolved beyond physical violence, the concept of carrying weapons during a diplomatic mission seemed incomprehensible. Their sensors registered the heat signatures of multiple firearms aboard the human vessel, triggering an immediate security response. The Queen herself emerged from her crystalline chambers, her scales flashing warning reds and golds. Her normally melodious voice took on an edge of concern as she approached the landing site, surrounded by her flowing advisors. When the human shuttle's door opened and Captain Hale stepped out, flanked by his armed security detail, the situation reached a boiling point. The Queen's advisors immediately surrounded her in a protective formation, their tentacles waving in alarm patterns that painted the air with urgent crimson symbols. Captain Hale raised his hands in a gesture of peace, but the sight of his sidearm holstered at his hip only intensified the Queen's unease. Through their newly established translation devices, which struggled to keep up with the complex emotional overtones of Xylophian speech, the Queen demanded an explanation. Why would beings come in peace while carrying instruments of death? The tension mounted as both sides tried to communicate across their fundamental differences in understanding. The Queen's crystalline throne room began to pulse with warning lights, responding to her heightened state of alert. What should have been a simple diplomatic meeting had transformed into a potential interstellar incident. The human security team's hands hovered near their weapons, trained to respond to perceived threats but completely misunderstanding the Xylophians' non-threatening protective postures. Meanwhile, the Queen's advisors began generating defensive energy fields, brilliant displays of light that only served to make the humans more nervous. In this charged atmosphere, A single misstep could shatter any hope of peaceful coexistence between the two species. In the midst of the escalating tension, a sudden shift in the crystalline floor caused Captain Hale to stumble forward. His movement triggered an automatic response from his security team, who instinctively reached for their weapons. The Queen, interpreting this as an aggressive stance, stepped back reflexively, directly into the path of Lieutenant Chen, who had drawn his sidearm in what he thought was a defensive posture. The weapon's barrel swung toward the alien monarch before anyone could react. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. The Queen's scale shifted to a dangerous shade of violet, indicating both fear and authority. Instead of retreating further, she did something unexpected. She extended one of her elegant limbs toward the weapon, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the obvious danger. "Does it work, human?" she asked through the translator, her voice carrying both curiosity and a challenge that echoed throughout the chamber. Lieutenant Chen froze, his training warring with the unprecedented situation. The weapon trembled slightly in his grip as he processed the alien ruler's words. Captain Hale, recognizing the gravity of the moment, stepped forward carefully, his hands still raised. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "This is a firearm. It's designed to dash." "I comprehend your explanation," the Queen interrupted, her multifaceted eyes fixed on the weapon. "But does it work against beings such as myself?" Her question wasn't hostile. Rather, it carried the genuine curiosity of a scientist examining a new phenomenon. The crystalline walls around them began to hum in response to her focused interest, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. The situation had transformed from confrontation to something far more complex. The Queen's advisors, sensing their ruler's intent, began moving closer, their flowing forms creating a mesmerizing dance of light and color. One of them extended a tendril toward the weapon, causing Lieutenant Chen to instinctively pull it back. "Wait!" the Queen commanded, her voice resonating with authority. "If you mean us harm, demonstrate. If not, show us why you carry such tools." Captain Hale exchanged a glance with his security team, each member struggling to process the surreal turn of events. The weapon that moments ago had been a source of conflict now hung in the balance between species, its purpose questioned not just as a tool of violence but as a symbol of human nature itself. The air crackled with unspoken possibilities as both humans and Xylofians waited to see how this unprecedented moment would unfold. As the Queen continued to study the weapon, her advisors began moving in synchronized patterns, their movements creating intricate light displays that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their thoughts. The crystalline structures surrounding them responded in kind, shifting and reshaping themselves into elaborate formations that reflected the growing tension and curiosity in the chamber. Captain Hale noticed how the entire environment seemed alive with anticipation, as if the very planet itself was holding its breath, waiting to see how these two vastly different species would navigate this unprecedented moment of cultural collision. Lieutenant Chen, still holding the weapon that had become the focal point of this extraordinary encounter, felt sweat forming on his brow despite the controlled climate of their suits. His training told him to maintain his position, but every instinct screamed at him to lower the weapon. The Queen's unwavering gaze never left the firearm, her scales shifting through subtle shades of blue and green, colors their translators hadn't yet fully understood but seemed to indicate deep contemplation. The human security team began communicating through subtle hand signals, their practiced coordination evident even in this alien environment. Each member adjusted their position slightly, creating a protective perimeter around their captain while maintaining enough distance to avoid appearing threatening. The Queen's advisors mirrored this movement, their fluid forms weaving between the crystalline structures in a dance that seemed both defensive and curious. Through their translation devices, which struggled to keep pace with the rapid exchange of information between the Queen and her court, fragments of their discussion became audible. Terms that didn't translate directly suggested they were debating the nature of human aggression, the concept of self-defense, and the paradox of carrying tools of destruction while seeking peaceful contact. The Queen occasionally added her own observations, her melodic voice rising above the chorus of her advisor's musical communication. Captain Hale took a careful step forward, his boots making no sound on the crystalline floor. "Your Majesty," he began again, choosing his words with utmost care, "we carry these weapons not out of aggression, but because we've learned through hard experience that the universe can be unpredictable." He gestured to his team, then to the weapon in Lieutenant Chen's hand. "This tool represents both our capacity for harm and our determination to protect ourselves and others." The Queen tilted her head, her multifaceted eyes catching the light in ways that made it impossible to determine exactly where she was looking. "You speak of protection," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made the very air seem heavier. "Yet your presence here, armed as you are, suggests you view us as a threat before we have proven ourselves otherwise." Her scales shifted to a deep indigo, a color pattern that seemed to resonate with the crystalline walls, causing them to emit low, mournful tones. Lieutenant Chen, still holding the weapon pointed toward the Queen, found himself caught in a web of conflicting emotions. His military training screamed at him to maintain control of the situation, to keep the weapon ready in case of hostilities. Yet the Queen's calm demeanor, her genuine curiosity about the firearm, and her complete lack of fear in the face of potential danger created a cognitive dissonance that shook his professional resolve. He could feel his finger resting lightly against the trigger guard, the familiar weight of the weapon in his hand contrasting sharply with the alien environment surrounding him. Every fiber of his being wanted to lower the gun, to show respect to this magnificent being who faced potential death with such grace and dignity. But protocol, drilled into him through years of service, demanded he maintain his position until given explicit orders otherwise. The internal struggle manifested in subtle ways. A slight tremor in his arms, a barely perceptible shift in his stance, the way his breathing quickened despite his attempts to remain calm. The Queen noticed these signs, her acute senses picking up on the human soldier's distress. Her scales shifted to a soft lavender, and she took a careful step forward, bridging the gap between them by mere inches. "This instrument of yours," she said, her voice taking on a gentle quality that seemed to bypass the translation device entirely, reaching directly into Chen's consciousness. "It troubles you to hold it against me, does it not?" Her observation wasn't accusatory but rather stated as a fact, one that seemed to resonate with the crystalline structures around them, causing them to pulse with sympathetic light. Chen swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the climate-controlled environment. "Ma'am," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "I'm following protocol." But even as he spoke, his grip on the weapon loosened fractionally, his stance becoming less rigid. The Queen's unwavering gaze seemed to pierce through years of military conditioning, challenging everything he thought he knew about duty and honor. The Queen's advisors reacted to this subtle change in posture, their flowing forms creating patterns of light that seemed to encourage the developing connection between their ruler and the human soldier. One advisor extended a tendril toward Chen's weapon, stopping just short of touching it, as if asking permission to examine it more closely. The lieutenant hesitated, caught between his training and the profound realization that this moment transcended standard operational procedures. As the standoff continued, Captain Hale worked furiously to find a way to bridge the gap between human and Xylofian perspectives. "Your Majesty," he interjected, "perhaps we could demonstrate the weapon's capabilities in a controlled manner?" He gestured toward a nearby crystalline formation that wasn't part of the living structure of the throne room. "We could show you how it functions without endangering anyone." The Queen considered this proposal, her scales shifting through contemplative shades of green and gold. "A demonstration," she mused, "but not of destruction. Show me instead how your species uses such tools to preserve life." Her multifaceted eyes locked onto Lieutenant Chen's face. "Can your weapon be used to protect rather than harm? Can you show me the choice that lies in your hands?" The request hung in the air, heavy with implications. The crystalline walls responded by reshaping themselves, creating a complex target range that incorporated both living and non-living elements. Some targets glowed with the same bioluminescence as the Xylofian forest, while others remained inert. The Queen's advisors began arranging themselves in patterns that suggested they were preparing to document and analyze whatever demonstration might follow. Lieutenant Chen found himself facing an unprecedented challenge. His military training had prepared him for countless combat scenarios, but never had he encountered a situation where the act of demonstrating a weapon's capability carried such profound diplomatic weight. The Queen's request went beyond a simple display of firepower. She was asking to witness the moral calculus that guided human decisions about the use of force. Captain Hale stepped forward, positioning himself between Chen and the impromptu firing range. "Your Majesty," he began, choosing his words carefully, "our weapons are tools of last resort. They represent our commitment to protecting those who cannot protect themselves." He nodded to Chen, who slowly lowered the weapon to a safer angle. "But perhaps there's another way to demonstrate our intentions." The crystalline structures around them began to hum in anticipation, their surfaces rippling with patterns that seemed to reflect the tension in the room. The Queen's scale shifted to a deep, thoughtful purple as she considered this new direction. Her advisors flowed closer, their movements creating intricate light displays that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their collective curiosity. The moment had transformed from a potential conflict into a profound opportunity, one that could redefine how both species viewed the concepts of power, protection, and trust. As the crystalline structures continued to reshape themselves, responding to the Queen's focused thoughts, a new element emerged in the chamber's atmosphere. The air seemed to vibrate with an energy that transcended the immediate situation, hinting at deeper connections between the two species. Captain Hale noticed how the bioluminescent patterns in the walls began mirroring the emotional responses of both humans and Xylophians, creating a visual symphony of shared experience. The Queen's advisors had arranged themselves in a formation that resembled a living constellation, their bodies pulsing with light patterns that seemed to correspond to the human's physiological responses. Lieutenant Chen's heart rate, visible through his suit's medical monitors, was reflected in the rhythm of their movements. This involuntary sharing of biological data created an unprecedented level of intimacy between the species, breaking down barriers that mere words could never overcome. Through their translation devices, fragments of Xylophian philosophy began to emerge. Concepts that defied direct translation, ideas about the interconnectedness of all beings, the fluid nature of trust, and the transformative power of vulnerability, filled the air with meanings that resonated on a primal level. The Queen herself seemed to be experiencing a shift in understanding, her scales cycling through colors that suggested deep contemplation of human nature. Captain Hale realized they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple diplomatic encounter. The presence of the weapon, once a source of tension, had become a catalyst for exploring fundamental questions about the nature of protection and the responsibilities that came with power. The crystalline walls began projecting images from both species' histories, scenes of conflict and cooperation, moments of courage and compassion, creating a shared narrative that transcended individual experiences. Lieutenant Chen, still holding the weapon but with a grip that had softened considerably, found himself connecting with the Queen's unwavering gaze in a way that felt almost telepathic. The boundaries between species, between cultures, between ways of understanding the universe seemed to blur and merge. The Queen's earlier question, "Does it work?" had evolved from a simple inquiry about functionality into a profound examination of what it meant to wield power responsibly. The crystalline throne room itself seemed to recognize this moment of transcendence, its structures beginning to sing with harmonics that resonated deep within the bones of everyone present. The Xylophian advisors' movements became more fluid, their forms intertwining with the humans' positions in a dance that neither species had choreographed but both instinctively understood. The demonstration of the weapon's capabilities had transformed into something far more meaningful, a shared exploration of how different species might learn to trust and protect each other across vast cultural divides. As the crystalline harmonics filled the chamber, creating a soundscape that seemed to resonate with the very essence of both species, an unexpected phenomenon began to unfold. The weapon in Lieutenant Chen's hand started to respond to the alien environment in ways that defied human engineering. Its metallic surface began to shimmer with the same bioluminescent patterns that danced across the Xylophian advisor's forms, as if the firearm itself was attempting to communicate. The Queen's scale shifted to a brilliant silver, indicating recognition of something profoundly significant. "Your tool speaks," she observed, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and understanding. "It carries within it not just the potential for destruction, but the history of your choices, your fears, your hopes." Her multifaceted eyes seemed to penetrate beyond the physical object, perceiving layers of meaning that even its human handlers hadn't fully grasped. Captain Hale watched in astonishment as the weapon's transformation continued. The crystalline structures around them began projecting holographic images drawn from Earth's history, moments when weapons had been used not just for violence, but for protection, for sacrifice, for preserving peace. Each image carried with it emotional resonances that transcended language, speaking directly to the Xylophians' heightened sensory perception. Lieutenant Chen felt the weight of his responsibility shift fundamentally. The weapon in his hand no longer felt like just a tool of war. It had become a living testament to humanity's complex relationship with power and protection. His fingers, still resting lightly on the trigger guard, seemed to sense the pulse of countless decisions made by those who had wielded similar instruments throughout history. The Queen extended one of her elegant limbs again, this time stopping mere inches from the transformed weapon. "Show me," she requested, her voice carrying a depth of meaning that made the translation device seem inadequate. Not how it destroys, but how it preserves. Not how it harms, but how it protects. Her request wasn't directed solely at Lieutenant Chen. It encompassed all present, asking them to demonstrate the fundamental values that guided their use of such powerful tools. In response to this profound challenge, the crystalline walls began generating scenarios, holographic representations of potential threats, both familiar and alien. Some depicted natural disasters, others showed acts of aggression, while still others presented moral dilemmas that required careful judgment. Each scenario pulsed with energy, waiting to be engaged with, to be understood and responded to. The human security team instinctively formed a protective perimeter around their captain and lieutenant, but their movements were now synchronized with the flowing patterns of the Xylofian advisors. The distinction between protector and protected began to blur as both species recognized their shared commitment to preservation and safety. The weapon in Lieutenant Chen's hand seemed to vibrate with this newfound understanding, its bioluminescent patterns shifting in harmony with the chamber's evolving light show. Through their translation devices came fragmented phrases from the Queen's court, speaking of concepts that challenged human understanding. Ideas about the fluid nature of threat assessment, the transformative power of trust, and the shared responsibility of protecting not just one's own species, but all intelligent life. These philosophical musings intertwined with practical demonstrations of how Xylofians themselves handled conflict resolution, revealing methods that relied more on communication and mutual understanding than on physical force. Captain Hale found himself nodding involuntarily as he processed these revelations. The standoff had evolved into something far more meaningful than either species could have anticipated. What had begun as a potentially disastrous misunderstanding had transformed into a profound exploration of how different beings conceptualized and implemented protection. The weapon remained at the center of this exchange, but its significance had shifted dramatically, from a symbol of potential conflict to a bridge between two fundamentally different approaches to maintaining peace and security. As the demonstration scenarios continued to unfold, each more complex than the last, an unexpected participant entered the chamber. A young Xylofian advisor, barely out of its formative cycle, pushed forward through the adult advisor's protective formation. Its body glowed with the bright, unfiltered colors of youth and curiosity, completely unlike the more subdued hues of its elders. The Queen made no move to stop it, her scales shifting to a soft, encouraging pink as she observed the juvenile's approach. The young advisor moved directly toward Lieutenant Chen, its tentacles undulating with excitement rather than fear. Without hesitation, it reached out and touched the weapon's shimmering surface. Instead of recoiling from the contact, the firearm's bioluminescent patterns intensified, responding to the young being's innocent curiosity. Lieutenant Chen froze, caught between his training to maintain control of the weapon and the overwhelming realization that this moment transcended standard protocols. The juvenile Xylofian began producing musical notes that didn't need translation, pure expressions of wonder and discovery that resonated throughout the chamber. Its touch seemed to awaken something deeper within the weapon, causing it to project images not just from human history, but from Earth's natural world as well. Scenes of predator and prey relationships, of animals protecting their young, of ecosystems maintaining balance through complex interactions filled the air around them. The Queen's scale shifted to a contemplative teal as she observed this unprecedented connection. Even your tools carry the essence of your world, she mused, her voice carrying a new depth of understanding. They are not merely instruments of destruction, but reflections of your planet's own mechanisms of protection and survival. Her multifaceted eyes turned to Captain Hale. Tell me, human leader, do you understand what your weapon has become in this moment? Before the captain could respond, the young advisor produced a series of high-pitched tones that caused the crystalline walls to ripple and reshape themselves once more. This time, they generated holographic representations of Xylofian history, moments when their species had faced threats and chosen non-violent paths to resolution. But unlike previous demonstrations, these images began merging with the human projections, creating hybrid scenarios that combined both species' approaches to conflict and protection. The weapon in Lieutenant Chen's hand vibrated with increasing intensity, its patterns now incorporating elements from both displays. The human security team instinctively tightened their formation, but their movements were now perfectly synchronized with those of the Xylofian advisors, creating a dance of protection that transcended individual species. The juvenile continued its exploration, its innocent curiosity breaking down barriers that years of diplomatic negotiations might never have achieved. Through their translation devices came fragments of ancient Xylofian wisdom, Speaking of how true understanding often comes through the eyes of the young and uncorrupted by preconceptions. The Queen herself seemed affected by this unexpected development, her normally regal demeanor softened by the sight of her young subject bridging the gap between species with nothing more than genuine curiosity and trust. The crystalline throne room responded to this deepening connection by generating new forms, structures that combined elements of human architecture with Xylofian organic design. These hybrid creations pulsed with a light that seemed to contain both species' essences, suggesting possibilities for cooperation and mutual growth that went far beyond the immediate diplomatic encounter. The standoff had evolved into something transformative, with the weapon serving as an unlikely catalyst for understanding between two vastly different civilizations. As the hybrid structures continued to grow and evolve around them, responding to the deepening connection between species, an unexpected change occurred in the crystalline formations. They began generating mathematical patterns and sequences that neither humans nor Xylofians could immediately comprehend. These patterns pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with both the weapon's vibrations and the young advisor's musical tones, creating a complex symphony of information that transcended traditional communication methods. The Queen's scale shifted to a brilliant opalescent sheen, indicating a state of profound revelation. She raised several of her limbs in a gesture that caused the entire chamber to resonate with harmonic frequencies. Through this action, she wasn't just observing the interaction between species. She was actively facilitating a deeper level of understanding. The mathematical patterns began to resolve themselves into something recognizable. They were mapping the fundamental similarities between human and Xylofian neural pathways, despite the vast physical differences between the species. Lieutenant Chen felt the weapon in his hand respond to these revelations, its bioluminescent patterns now incorporating elements of both species' thought processes. The firearm had transformed from a simple tool of violence into a sophisticated interface, translating complex concepts between human and Xylofian minds. Through this conduit, he began to perceive the world through Xylofian senses, feeling the emotional resonance of colors, understanding the musical nuances of their speech, and grasping their non-linear concept of time and causality. Captain Hale watched as his security team's movements became increasingly synchronized with the Xylofian advisor's graceful flows. Their combined patterns created intricate geometric designs in the air, visible only through the interplay of light and shadow cast by the hybrid crystalline structures. These patterns weren't random. They represented shared values and mutual understanding emerging from the depths of both species' collective consciousness. The weapon's vibrations harmonized with these movements, amplifying the connection rather than disrupting it. The young advisor, still touching the transformed firearm, began producing new sequences of tones that seemed to unlock deeper levels of meaning in the mathematical patterns. Through this unexpected channel, humans began to understand the Xylofian concept of resonant protection, a philosophy that viewed defense not as a barrier against threats, but as a dynamic field of mutual support and growth. This revelation caused the crystalline walls to blossom with new formations that combined defensive structures with nurturing environments, challenging human notions of security and safety. Through their enhanced connection, both species began to perceive how their different approaches to protection could complement rather than conflict with each other. The weapon in Lieutenant Chen's hand served as a tangible representation of this synthesis, maintaining its fundamental purpose while transforming into something that embodied both species' values. The Queen's advisors flowed around the humans in patterns that suggested they were documenting this unprecedented moment of cross-species understanding, their movements creating records in living crystal that would preserve this breakthrough for future generations. As the mathematical patterns continued to evolve, they began revealing deeper truths about both species' evolutionary paths. The humans discovered that Xylofians had long ago faced their own challenges with violence and aggression, developing their current peaceful society through conscious choice rather than natural disposition. Similarly, the Xylofians gained insight into humanity's struggles to balance self-preservation with ethical responsibility, understanding that Earth's turbulent history had shaped their guests' cautious approach to first contact situations. The crystalline throne room itself seemed to expand, its dimensions shifting to accommodate the growing connection between species. New forms emerged from the living crystal, structures that defied classification as either human or Xylofian, yet somehow contained elements of both. These hybrid creations pulsed with possibilities for future cooperation, suggesting technological and cultural exchanges that could benefit both civilizations without compromising their unique identities. Through this profound exchange, both species began to recognize that their initial misunderstanding had led them to a discovery far more valuable than simple diplomatic relations. They were witnessing the birth of a new paradigm in interspecies communication, one that transcended language and protocol to touch the very essence of what it meant to protect, to trust, and to grow together in an uncertain universe. The weapon, once a symbol of potential conflict, had become the foundation of this revolutionary understanding, proving that even tools designed for destruction could serve as bridges between worlds when approached with openness and courage. As the connection between species deepened, the crystalline structures began generating scenarios that went beyond immediate diplomatic concerns. These projections showed possible futures where human and Xylofian technologies merged to create entirely new forms of protection and cooperation. In one vision, Earth's orbital defense systems integrated with Xylofian energy fields to create shields that could safeguard both planets from cosmic threats. Another scenario depicted joint exploration missions where human spacecraft were enhanced with living Xylofian technology, allowing them to adapt to hostile environments while maintaining ecological balance. The Queen's scale shifted to a radiant gold, indicating a state of profound decision-making. She extended multiple limbs, causing the hybrid crystalline structures to rearrange themselves into what appeared to be a living treaty document. This organic contract pulsed with the combined essence of both species, its clauses written not in words but in patterns of light and sound that carried meaning directly to the consciousness of all present. The weapon in Lieutenant Chen's hand responded to this development by projecting Earth's most sacred symbols of agreement and commitment, which the crystalline formations absorbed and transformed into universal concepts of mutual respect and shared responsibility. Captain Hale felt a profound shift in the atmosphere as the implications of these visions became clear. The standoff had evolved into something far greater than a simple diplomatic resolution. They were witnessing the emergence of a new kind of interspecies relationship, one based not on power dynamics or trade agreements, but on a fundamental understanding of shared values and complementary strengths. The human security team's movements had become indistinguishable from those of the Xylofian advisors, their combined patterns creating a living representation of this new alliance. Through their enhanced connection, both species began to perceive how their different approaches to problem-solving could create solutions neither could achieve alone. The Xylofians' fluid, intuitive methods combined with humanity's structured, analytical thinking to generate strategies for addressing challenges that ranged from environmental protection to interstellar diplomacy. The crystalline projections revealed these possibilities in vivid detail, showing how the two species could work together to face not just local threats, but cosmic dangers that neither could confront alone. The young advisor, still connected to the transformed weapon, began producing tones that seemed to solidify these possibilities into tangible opportunities. Each note caused the living treaty to grow more complex, incorporating new elements of cooperation and mutual support. The Queen's court flowed around the humans in patterns that suggested they were weaving these possibilities into the very fabric of their society's future plans, while the human security team's positions indicated an unconscious acceptance of these new responsibilities and opportunities. Through this unprecedented exchange, both species began to understand that their initial misunderstanding had led them to discover something far more valuable than simple peaceful coexistence. They were forging a partnership that could redefine how intelligent species interacted across the stars, creating a model for interspecies cooperation that balanced strength with compassion, technology with wisdom, and protection with growth. The crystalline throne room itself seemed to acknowledge this historic moment, its structures singing with harmonics that resonated with the potential of what these two species could achieve together. The Queen stepped forward, her scales shimmering with a final, resolute shade of radiant blue. "This moment," she declared, her voice resonating like a symphony, "marks the beginning of something greater than either of our species could have achieved alone." The crystalline treaty solidified into a living monument, its light pulsing in harmony with the weapon still held by Lieutenant Chen, now transformed into a symbol of unity rather than division. Captain Hale bowed deeply, his gesture mirrored unconsciously by his team. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "we came here as strangers, but we leave as partners." The young advisor released the weapon gently, its glow now steady and serene, as if acknowledging its new purpose. Around them, the hybrid crystalline structures hummed softly, preserving this moment forever in their intricate patterns. The Queen extended one limb toward the humans, her touch igniting a cascade of light that connected every being in the chamber. "Let this be remembered," she intoned, "not as a day of conflict, but as the dawn of understanding." The Xylofian advisors flowed into a final formation, their movements creating a sphere of light that enveloped both species in warmth and trust. Lieutenant Chen lowered the weapon completely, its transformation now complete. It was no longer just a tool, It was proof that even the most dangerous objects could become bridges when wielded with wisdom and respect. As the humans prepared to depart, the Queen's parting words echoed through the chamber. "Go forth, not as visitors, but as allies. Together, we will protect what matters most, the future." With that, the crystalline walls opened to reveal a sky alive with auroras, their colors blending Earth's blues and greens with Xylophia 7's radiant hues. The humans stepped out, their hearts lighter, their minds expanded. Behind them, the throne room sang softly, its melody carrying the promise of a shared destiny. And so, two vastly different species walked forward, not apart, but together, into a brighter, boundless tomorrow.